Hello and welcome to helpyourmath.com. In this video, we're going to look at dividing rational numbers and writing the answers as a decimal rounded to an indicated place. Before we get started, let's go over some tips for dividing with fractions. First, we want to write all numbers as proper or improper fractions if we have one single fraction. For integers, we can create a fraction by putting the value over 1. So for example, if we have the number 2, we can turn 2 into a fraction by putting it over 1. Because 2 divided by 1 is equal to 2. For a mixed number, we can write it as its equivalent improper fraction. So the way we do that, if we have 4.5, let's say, is you take the denominator and you multiply it to the whole part, so that'd be 8, and then you add the numerator. 8 plus 1 is 9, so 4.5 is equivalent to 9 halves. And the reason that this works is because 4.5 is really an addition problem, 4 plus 1/2. And so what we're doing is we're taking the whole part and we're putting it over 1, and we're creating a common denominator, which would be 2. So that's why we do the denominator times the whole part, because we're just turning that into a fraction with a common denominator. And then it would be that product plus that numerator over the given denominator, right? So it works out. That's why that works. Okay, next what we want to do is rewrite the division as multiplication by multiplying by the reciprocal of the divisor. So what this means is that if we have A over B divided by C over D, we can write this as an equivalent multiplication problem by doing A over B times D over C. So we take the reciprocal of the divisor. This one's called the divisor, and the first one's called the dividend. And so they're equivalent. It's nice, it works out. Once you have it written as multiplication, you can look for common factors to simplify and then multiply across the top, which would give us A times D, or if anything factored then or canceled, then it might not be A times D over B times C. And some tips for rounding decimals. The place to which we need to round should be indicated, so it should give us as tenths or hundredths or thousandths. Prepare to include one place past the indicated place to round. So if it asks us to round to the nearest tenth, we want to include the hundredths place, because the hundredths place is going to tell us what tenth we actually want or it will be rounded to. Or if you're asked to round to the nearest hundredth, you would need to know the thousandths place, etc. When we're rounding, if the digit in the position 1 decimal smaller than the place we're rounding to is between 0 and 4, leave the digit as is. So if we're rounding to the nearest tenth and we have 0.82, the 2 is in the hundredths place, and the 2 indicates to us we're going to leave the 8 alone. And so this would just be rounded if we're rounding to the nearest tenth. This is closest to 8 tenths, right? 0.82 is closest to 8 tenths. If the digit in the position 1 decimal place smaller than the place we're rounding to is between 5 and 9, then we're going to round the digit up 1. So if we have if we're rounding to nearest tenth and we have 0.87, there's a 7 in the hundredths place. The 7 would bump this up, meaning that 0.87 is closer to 9 tenths than it is to 8 tenths or any other tenth for that matter. And there is a special case. If the digit to be rounded up is a 9, then it bumps the next place too. So if we have 0.96, the 6 tells the 9 to bump up, but you can't bump up the digit 9. So that would then go into the units place, giving us 1.0. So what we would be saying is that the tenth that 96 hundredths is closest to is actually 1.0 tenths, or 1 whole 0.0. So kind of crazy how that happens, but that's, the special case if we do have a 9 in that particular position. Okay, let's get started. We want to divide, and we're going to round our answer to the nearest tenth. So the first thing we want to do here, remember, is write this as multiplication. So to write this as multiplication, we're going to keep the dividend the same, change this to multiplication, and multiply by the divisor, the reciprocal of the divisor. The reciprocal is when you switch the values of the numerator and denominator. That will be 10 over 9. Now that we have it written as multiplication, we can look for common factors between any numerator and any denominator. So for example, 6 and 9 have a common factor of 3. 6 divided by 3 is 2, and 9 divided by 3 is 3. And I think that's it. There's no other common. 2 and 11 have nothing in common. 2 and 3 have nothing in common besides 1. and 10 and 11, 10 and 3, nothing besides 1. So we'll multiply straight across and we get 20 over 33. But this tells us that we want to round to the nearest tenth. So what we would do now is we would set up a long division and we would say 33 into 20, because we always put the denominator outside and the numerator inside. I remember somebody describing this to me and they said basically this makes the 20 tilt over, and so it'll become over here. So this line kind of just flips over. I thought that was clever. Okay, anyway, so we have 33 into 20 and we're rounding to the nearest tenth. So I'm going to add to the 20 a tenths place and a hundredths place. And because there's no other decimals, we're going to move this straight up and we're going to start dividing. 33 goes into 20 0 times. 33 goes into 200. If you don't know, go off to the side and take a guess. So I'm going to go with 6 maybe. This would be 18. Ooh, really, really close. Okay, so we're going to put a 6 here, minus 198. And that's going to be a difference. 200 minus 198 is 2. Bring down the 0. 33 goes into 20 0 times. So what does the 0 tell the 6 in the tenths place? It tells it to stay the same. So this would end up becoming approximately, I said equals, but that's actually not right. We would say approximately 6/10, right? It's not exactly 6/10, it's approximately 6/10. Okay, how about this example? We want to divide and we want to round our answer to the nearest hundredth. The first thing that I would do here, this is called a complex fraction, is I would take the middle division bar and rewrite it as the division symbol. So I'm going to rewrite this as 1 over 30 divided by 2 over 47. Okay, that looks a lot less scary. Now we can use the fact that we can rewrite this division as multiplication by multiplying by the reciprocal of the divisor. That'd be 1 over 30 times 47 over 2. And we don't have anything that we can simplify. 1 is already as low as it can get. 47 is prime, so we're going to multiply straight across. That gives us 47 over 60. And so again, we want to set up the long division. We're rounding this time to the nearest hundredth. So when we set up our long division, we need the dividend to go to the thousandths place. Remember, the denominator goes outside our long division and the numerator goes inside. We're going to set this up tenths, hundredths, thousandths. Move the decimal point straight up and we can start dividing. So 60 goes into 47 0 times. 60 goes into 470. It would be, let's see, so it's like 6 into 47 would be 42, which is 7 times. 7 times 60 is 420. So we're going to subtract 470 minus 420 is 50. And we know that we're good because 50 is smaller than 60, right? If you have a partial quotient that's after a subtraction, if that's bigger than 60, then you didn't choose well enough. If you end up with something negative, you chose a number too big. We'll bring down the next place. We'll bring down that 0. 60 goes into 500. So again, what we can do is we can kind of ignore a 0 from each and say, okay, well, how many times does 6 go into 50? 6 goes into 50 8 times, right? That gets us to 48. So 8 times 60 is 480. And then this would be 20, a difference of 20. Bring down the 0. And 60 into 200, that would be 3. And then from here, you'll notice even in the last example, I don't actually need to do this subtraction. You can do it just to know that, it really should be a 3 and not a 2 or a 4 or anything else. But all we needed was that value. We needed to know that it was a 3 because that just tells us what we're gonna do with that 8 in the hundredths place. And it tells us that we're going to leave it as an 8. So this is gonna be approximately 0.78 hundredths or 78 hundredths. Would be our final quotient. In our last example, we have 300 divided by 7/12. So the first thing we want to do is turn 300 into a fraction. And remember how we take a whole number and turn it into a fraction? We put it over 1. Then we would say divided by 7/12. Now I'm going to rewrite this as multiplication. So that would be 300 over 1 times 12 over 7. And now I want to see if I can simplify before I multiply. No, because 7 doesn't go into 300, nor does it go into 12. So we're going to multiply straight across. 300 times 12 is 360. Sorry. That would be 30 times 12. That would be 3,600 over 1 times 7 is 7. And what are we doing? We're rounding to the nearest tenth. So the 7, our divisor, goes outside the division. The 3,600 goes inside. And if we're going to the tenths place, we're going to add a decimal point. There's our tenths place, but we also need the hundredths place. Move the decimal point straight up, and let's start dividing. 7 goes into 3 0 times. 7 goes into 36 5 times. Minus 35. And we end up with 1. Bring down the 0. 7 goes into 10 1 time. Minus 7. We have 3 left over. Bring down the 0. 7 goes into 30 4 times. So it's right before the decimal point. Minus 4 times 7 is 28. I ran out of space. We have a 2. We'll bring down the next 0. I'm going to put over here, I'm just going to put that 20 again. 7 goes into 22 times. That would be minus 14. 20 minus 14 is 6. And we're going to bring down this last 0. 7 goes into 60. It would be 8 times. And we don't need to do this. You can just confirm that we do end up with something that would be 4. Yep. So this keeps going. We're not done, but we got to where we needed to be in order to be able to round to the nearest tenth. The 8 in the hundredths place tells the 2 in the tenths place to bump up 1. So this just means that 28 hundredths is closer to 3 tenths than 2 tenths. It's like saying that 28 is closer to 30 than 20, which we can agree is true. So our final result here, our final quotient, will be 514.3 approximately. These have been examples of dividing with fractions. Thank you for stopping by.